I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. Today's episode is sponsored by Bethany House. They have provided a book flight described as this: from ancient history to the Salem witch trials to the Frontier era, these page-turning historical novels all have one thing in common: the relationship between sisters. And listeners, if you know me, you know I love a good historical novel. So stay tuned at the end of the show for a book flight from Bethany House. Plus, make sure to check the links in the show notes for 30% off and free shipping through their website. In today's episode, I am chatting with Erin Roese. Erin is a homeschooling mama to 3 littles, ages 7, 5, and 3, and 2 angel babies, a co-author of a #1 bestseller with Kimberly Olson, and podcast host, executive producer of Dear Mama, You're Going to Find Your Joy Again podcast. After going through her first miscarriage, she began the journey back to the new version of herself to find joy again in her motherhood journey. I am excited to have Erin here today. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, I am so glad we have connected, because even just in your bio, I'm like, this resonates with my life.
The chaos of motherhood. I feel like it's very nice when you have that person that just connects and they get it and you don't really have to explain yourself.
Yes, and this podcast is kind of coming out of the trenches of that a little bit. That was what started this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So.
I started after I went through my first miscarriage. I was just really, I think, I still am, still working through some of the stuff, obviously, but very much just like everyone would say, you'll get back to you. You'll get back to you. And then I noticed a lot with other people saying, just in general in motherhood, you'll get back to you. And I was like, I don't even know who that person is anymore, because the person I'm thinking of is someone who didn't have any responsibilities, who just, could go when I wanted to go. I didn't have to prepare and think and be worried about anything other than myself and my husband. And so there's no way I can get back to who that is, because that person doesn't exist anymore. So it's like this new person that's coming, and I'm discovering who that is as I go. And so I was encouraged. It was probably a month after I went through the miscarriage. Like a coach was like, you should start a podcast talking about your motherhood journey, because I was telling her about some of the things that I had been doing as a mom, and she was laughing. She's like, this is so funny. She's like, I'm sure so many moms out there are the same, but they just don't talk about it. And I said, yeah, okay, and she goes, I really think you should. And I was like, I don't think so. And she goes, no, just try it. So really started thinking about it and just hit record and went and that went from there. So
for your podcast, is it solo episodes? Are you interviewing other guests, or how do you have that set up?
I do both. It kind of just depends on I connect with people and I'll say, hey, I think you'd be a good fit, and I just ask them if they'd like to come on. I do solo episodes. I like to sit down and just kind of see where I'm at in motherhood in that moment, and then talk about, if I'm struggling in a certain area, and then what I found that helps me. And sometimes it doesn't even need to be that it helps you. It's just talking about it so that other moms are like, oh, okay, I'm not the only one. I'm not solo in this. I feel like I'm connected with someone that is right there and they understand what I'm going through. So you don't feel alone.
Yeah. I have talked to a lot of guests about books for this very similar reason, right? Maybe books on tougher topics. And to your point on the podcast is just knowing that you're not alone in this journey where you might feel completely isolated, which sometimes I think motherhood can feel very isolating, especially with young babies, and you don't have any time for yourself. That is so important for other moms to hear, like, oh no, there is struggle here and it's okay. Yes. We're all learning on this journey.
And it's okay to say. A big thing has been it's okay to say something is hard. It doesn't mean that you're complaining. It doesn't mean that you're a horrible person. It just means it's okay to feel that feeling, and then you have to sit with it for a minute, and then you can move on and go through it. But you can't feel guilty for saying, I mean, I felt guilty in those moments where I would be like, this season sucks. This
Yeah.
season sucks. And then I'd be like, oh, I shouldn't say that. I should be so thankful, that my kids are healthy. But I was like, no, it's okay to say those things because it is the truth. I mean,
Yeah.
you're not going to love every moment of every part of your life. So it's okay to say and acknowledge it, but like don't stay stuck in that, but acknowledge it and be
Yeah.
like, yeah, this is hard. I don't like this.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you can be like, okay, what are we going to do differently?
Yeah.
Right? How are we going to change that? I remember last summer, my husband, we're a military family. So we had just moved. And he looked at me and he's like, why don't you go do something? I got the kids. And exactly to your point that you said already. I was like, I didn't really have a lot of friends at that point because we had just moved here. So I'm like, I don't even know who to call to be like, do you want to go do something? And then I was like, I literally don't know what I like to do anymore. Like I had lost myself completely. I was like, you tell me I have 3 hours. I don't even know what to do with 3 hours.
Yeah, it's what? Should I clean? And then it's like, no, I don't want to clean. And
Yeah.
then by the time you decide what you want to do, it's time to go back with the kid.
Yes. And that was really disconcerting for me in that moment of like, I literally don't know myself anymore. Because you're just been a caretaker and you've been doing and you've been your to-do lists and things just take over your life. And it's really hard to make time.
It is.
Yeah.
It is for sure.
And like you said, it's not complaining. It just is recognizing like, whoa, three
Yeah.
years. And I like haven't even thought about what I might like to do.
If I have free time where I don't have to actually take care of someone else, what do I want to do?
Yeah. And I always think of when I get in the car to go somewhere by myself, because it is so rare that silence is almost deafening. Like of, oh my, it's so quiet in here that it's almost loud.
Yes. And so my husband and I drive for vacations, we camp. And so
Okay.
we drive. And honestly, his family is from Long Island. I'm from Vermont. So we live in Vermont. And it's
Okay.
about like an 8-hour trip to his parents. And we drove 8 hours in silence because we drove at night and the kids were all sleeping in the back. And it was just the funniest thing. We both kind of looked at each other and we're like, oh, we haven't really spoken because we were just enjoying the silence of just we were together.
Yeah. It's like companionable
Yeah.
silence.
I'm like, oh my gosh, we sound like 80-year-olds. We have nothing to talk
Yeah.
about.
And
Yeah.
sometimes I think back to my younger self that thought what I thought parenthood would look like. And I'm like, oh gosh, you could never prepare for it.
No. There is no manual. There is nothing. And I said it probably would be easier if there was a manual to give you a guideline, I guess. But every kid is so different. Even, I mean, I have three and you have three. And I was like, they're just all so different. They're very similar in certain
Yeah.
ways, but they're very different personalities and just how you talk to them and just, certain responsibilities that you can give them just depends on the kid. And so it
Yeah.
cracks me up. I was like, even if you had a manual, it wouldn't work on this one. Like,
Got to try a different technique here. I'm actually reading a book right now called Triggers, and
oh,
it's about when your kids trigger you and your responses. And I love it because it gives very practical advice on different situations like strong willed child, defiance. And then it gives you like practical sentences to apply to that situation, which I really enjoyed. I'm like literally like went to the back of the book. I don't often write in books, but went to the back and I'm like writing down, okay, strong willed. Here's what I'm
oh,
going to say. And not that I think that it's going to become like a script,
right.
but
But it gives
just in those moments of like frustration when you're worked up, to maybe have some tools to apply that are more, more constructive
us.
than destructive.
I get it. I'll have to check that book out. You'll have to give me the author when we're
Yeah, it's
done.
Wendy Leah, I think, and Amber Speak. It's two, and I believe that's their last names coordinated with the right first name. Um,
Okay.
but it's been so good. And what I was gonna say about that is they talk in there about being like a coach of your child. Think about how coaches interact with kids and how you're wanting to encourage them to do other things, but you're also trying to, critique some of their movement and I was like, I love that kind of analogy of thinking about it as a coach and approaching it like that because we can all, I think most of us, right, can think of about a good coach we've had in our life that you maybe want to emulate and so I was like, oh, I just love that
A great
idea.
way to too, if you think about just how you encourage your child too, because you have coaches that were tough on you a little bit, and
Yeah.
and do the tough love, I guess, when you needed it. And so I like that analogy.
Yeah, it's really, and I read it last week and it's just been lingering in my mind of thinking about my interaction with my kids. And like you said, every kid's going to be different on your team. And so you just have to figure out, which might take time and practice to figure out
Yeah.
how to motivate each child. But I don't know. It gave me comfort and like an idea of like, let's try it.
And then you have something. You don't feel like you're just kind of trying to figure out. I said, what gets confusing is you have all of these, I guess, theories and ways that people say to do things. And you're just like, okay, let's try this on this child. But you don't really stop to think, this kid is a strong-willed child. This kid they're motivated by rewards. I mean, my oldest, she's very motivated by rewards, which is good and bad. But I
Yeah.
said, my middle is like, he could care less. He's like, I don't really want to do it. So you
Yeah.
give me, I don't really care. I'm probably going to go sneak it when you're not around. So
Yeah.
that's where you put it. And I was like, okay, we have to come up with like a different strategy for him. But that's a good thing to have, though, for the right words.
So in your podcast, how often are your episodes coming out?
I try to do every couple of weeks.
Okay.
Definitely like the one every 2 weeks, just with the schedule with the kids. I'm up to 10, I believe almost 10 episodes right now because
Yay.
I was like, yeah, I've hit 10 episodes.
The
Um,
milestones are important. You should celebrate them.
so it's just really trying in the new year to have a lot more content. Probably will have some more guest speakers on. I would love to have you on and have a
Yeah.
chat, because I feel like we definitely connect. So
Yeah.
just trying to find ways of helping mothers, anything, and that finding that joy in motherhood is all, I think, the whole part of us is mental, physical, obviously communication. So I've had a marriage coach, I've had a life coach, health and wellness coach. So it's just little tips to help you so that you feel your best, so you can show up in your
Yeah.
best way, which some days is, like I said, easier said than done.
Well, that's what I was going to say when I was prepping for our show. I was on your website and you had just some really easy, practical tips. I mean, we even said it in your bio, right? Like this could be as simple as having your nails look good or having a
Yeah.
fun pair of earrings. Like it doesn't have to be these big things, which I think seems so unattainable at certain points of the journey.
When you
And
can't
so I
even say
love,
it's
yeah. And so I love what you're doing there, that it's very practical, simple, attainable for anybody to be able to do these things.
yeah, I said I feel like that too was part of it, because people would say you need to take care of yourself. And I was like, my kids are all 2 years apart. So it was
With what
literally,
time?
I know. Okay, I breastfed all of them, which two of them were a struggle. And so, you would have one needed to be fed every 2 hours. They wouldn't take a bottle, would not take a bottle. And so it was like you have a toddler and you have a baby. And then I remember people saying you need to take time for yourself. And it was like, you need to take a whole day. You need to take a whole, it'd be great if you could do a weekend. And I'm like, I can't
Yeah.
right now. So it was almost that guilt and that feeling of failure because I couldn't even make time for myself.
Yeah.
And so as a mom, I think we feel that guilt more, it's just there. And for some reason, I don't know why,
Yeah.
but it was like I failed at even just taking care of myself. And I was like, this is not, I just need like an hour or two to just maybe go outside and just be in quiet, or go for a walk and listen to my music and not have someone need me. Or even just on those days, I'm like, I can just put on my favorite pair of earrings and it makes me feel a little bit more like me. It
Yeah.
makes me feel a little bit more put together, even though I'm still in maybe my ratty t-shirt and my
Yeah.
leg. I haven't gotten out of my pajamas, but I have my earrings in. And so it really, after the miscarriage too, it started to be like, moms don't always have the time to take
Mhm.
a huge chunk of time to go take care of yourself. So if you can do these little things on a daily basis or even a weekly basis, it can help you to just have some of that, I think, release of, okay, I still am taking care of myself, but not feeling guilty that you can't step away from your kids if that's not possible.
Like you said, maybe the small step forward of just putting in a different pair of earrings, that takes seconds. And that could be all that it does to mindset shift, right? Just shift you into like out of this negative feedback loop potential.
Found that just little things will change my mindset, and I have to work some days very much on it to just stay in a positive mindset when it's one of those days where you're like, the ship is on fire, everyone's jumping overboard and the ship is sinking.
Yeah.
That is the scenario in our house right now. And it's like, well, okay, I got my earrings in.
Well, I love it. Okay, so listeners, it's called Dear Mama, You're Going to Find Your Joy Again. Where can we find your podcast?
You can find it on Apple and Spotify.
Okay.
And like I said, usually I have a new episode every 2 weeks. So that's the cool.
Okay. All right. So you can go find her there. I have actually found this is when I always have been a lifelong reader, but when we moved to Sicily. We were living overseas. And so another scenario where like I don't know anybody, right? So now we've moved overseas. I like don't know anybody. We have my oldest, I think, was 19 months at the time. And we had 2 babies in Sicily. So I spent a lot of time at home, right? Like that stage of life, you just get, like you said, you're breastfeeding, the baby barely sleeps. You don't want to go out because you don't sleep either. So it's like, okay, I'm just going to stay at my house. But I really turned to reading after that. And I found that that was a great way in motherhood to feel like I at least escaped from the day, right? I might not have left my house, but I went to Paris through my book, or I went to some fantasy world through my book. And books, I feel like, really gave me peace in motherhood because I could transport myself into someone else's life. Even if all I did that day was like live in the house and have spit up on me. And like you said, have dirty clothes on and not get a shower and not even have a moment to myself. But it was like, oh, I could go be this Parisian woman and like live in this book and story. So reading really became that release for me in those young days of motherhood.
It is, and it does take you to a different place. And I've read all my life, and that's the same thing, as it would just take you away in those moments. And finding I struggle now I try to sit down, like I was telling you before, and read. I have like 3 books going right now.
Yep.
So you go. But I said it also too, just to almost just take your mind off of the daily, what you're doing and that stress. So it's like, and if you feel like you're having a hard day and struggling, and you can sit down at night and just read a paragraph or a page, and it just takes you kind of forget, like you said, it's, maybe you had a rough day, and you just, okay, I can relax.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said about like true leisure time, right? And I think that reading applies to this versus, I mean, don't get me wrong, I've done it, but like go sitting on my phone and scrolling on my phone, like that does not reset my brain the same way reading resets my brain, or whatever. You could put in whatever term you want there, but I think that's important to remember in motherhood is when we have so little time as is, like what really fills you up when you have that moment, right? Like, is it doom scrolling on your phone, or is it maybe watching your favorite show, right? I think watching TV and movies can be very similar to a book, right? It's an escape. But what really helps you feel recharged to be able to start the next day? And I think that that's important for us to recognize because it's so easy to dive into the addictive phone.
And I 100% agree, because it's been so easy. I mean, on those rough days, sometimes you just pick up your phone and you're like, okay, I'm going to scroll, because you just want just a moment to be like, okay, what's going on? But same as I was noticing, it's not resetting me. It actually, I find, and I will notice this, is that when my kids come in the room, if I am on my phone, if I start getting annoyed at them because they're asking me a question.
Because you're doing something, right?
Yeah. I'm like, I'm not really doing anything. So I'm like, I'm getting annoyed at you, and this is because I'm on my phone. That's not okay. Like, I need to put this down, because this is obviously not important. And it's been trying to figure out, even when I have them go in quiet time. I do air quotes.
We do too.
Does it work for you?
My younger two, yes. Like they are very independent players in
Yeah.
general, but it never worked for my eldest ever. It was like a pipe dream with him.
I'm like, okay, it's quiet time. So they'll go in, and my littlest one, we're hanging on to those naps as long as we
Yeah.
can. She'll go in, she'll nap, and my two older will play together, but it's like loud playing. It's
Yeah.
like loud play. So it's basically,
WWE out there.
I'm like, they're just in the other room playing loud. And I remember it might have been it was last week. They were playing, and I was just like, I'm sitting here, and the temptation was to go on my phone. And
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to pick up my book and I'm going to read because I
Yep.
really am intrigued by this book, The Hunt Parent Gather. And I said, I started reading it and getting into it. And then just some of the advice that it was giving about parenthood, I was like, okay. So when they came out, I felt like my brain had just, I get not totally rewired, but it had reset where I was like, okay, I can look at some of these situations with a fresh take. I don't feel almost like anxious when you get on your phone and you feel that you get irritated easily. I don't know.
Yeah.
For me, that's how I feel. And so I was like, I wasn't getting irritated as easily with them if they would interrupt me when I was doing something. And I said, yeah, okay, we need to take more note of that
Yeah.
and make sure that instead of doing the phone, we're picking up something or just not even, taking a second. So
Yeah. I always had a book right by where I would nurse as well. And so that way it was, if I wanted to pick that up, if I had a quiet moment, maybe the baby fell asleep on me, I could just grab the book and it was always right there. So,
that's a good too to keep you so that you're not tempted to get up and go.
yeah, exactly. Like you might get invested in the story and listen. Well, let's switch gears a little bit because I feel like we're right at this perfect segue and talk about who you are as a reader. What type of genres do you enjoy reading?
Feel like I do everything. I've surprised myself a couple of times because of the books I've been interested in, but I love like just more action, mystery, sometimes not scary. I can't do scary because I can't, my mind will start going, but just sometimes mystery, intrigue. I like right now the ones that I'm reading, it's like I guess we call them self-help. I don't know.
Yeah.
But ones that really help you to grow as a person. I love John Maxwell books, Max Lucado, and just well-written parenting books from moms who are very able to give the advice from a loving heart in a
Yeah.
way. But just I like older historical fiction as well. People used to pick on me because I was like a teenager and everybody was reading, whatever the newest book was. And I would have like this book about, it was like historical fiction about this girl that had moved west and she was like on the wagon train. I'm like, and when I read the Twilight books, and I have to say I did get hooked on those, but I didn't read those until I was in like my 20s, maybe later in 20s after everybody had read them. But that surprised me because they don't usually go in that
Yeah.
direction. I very, very much enjoyed those. And it was just a new type of reading for me because I don't
Yeah.
usually do fantasy. So, and the Hunger Games, after I read those, I read the Hunger Games and I was like, am I just missing this whole realm of books
Yeah.
I'd never really.
Historical fiction is my go-to genre as well. And I actually had a guest come on. Kristen Hanna came on
Okay.
last or like a week and a half ago. And she talked about as an author how historical fiction and fantasy are along the same lines because you have to world build in both of them. And I was like, I have never thought about that. But fantasy has been a genre I've been exploring over this past year. And it was kind of the impetus for starting this podcast of like, I want to try the fantasy genre, but I don't know where to start. And I have so little time. So I want someone to tell me what books I should read in fantasy. And I'm going to go read them. And that's how the book flight came about was like, give me 3 books that I could go sample this genre and see if I like it. But I loved what she talked about was like, it's so true. She's like, I have to take Paris from the 1940s during World War II. So it was a Paris that did exist, but it doesn't exist anymore. And then I have to create that in the story so you feel like you are stepping into that Paris. And I was like, mind blown. I was like, oh my gosh, I've literally never thought about it that way. But I have really enjoyed fantasy this year. And it makes sense because there is that world building and feeling like you're stepping into this other realm that historical
Yeah.
fiction had too.
It's very cool. I said I what's that is that I like those fantasy, like the Twilight and the Hunger Games. I was like, this is not my normal style, but I remember in high school I did enjoy The Giver, the book The Giver. And I don't know why that just blew my mind at thinking of how, they were like everything in light and only one person can see. And I was like, that is so wild. What if that was true? I remember talking to my classmates and they're, we have to read this book. I think I was like the only one in the class that read the book because they actually liked it. I would go ahead.
Yeah.
Like, okay, no, whatever. We have to read this because we have to. I was like,
Yeah.
but it's a good book.
Which I do feel like assigned read, like if it's assigned reading, that really changes how you're reading as well. I have gone back and read some of these assigned reading we had in school, and I have enjoyed them so much more. Maybe because I'm an adult, so I understand them possibly a little bit better. I've had more life experience, but I didn't love them back when I read them in school. And I'm like, I should revisit that. That's a classic. Like maybe, and then I have really enjoyed it as I've read it as an adult. Well, let's talk about in your busyness, how do you find time to read?
I have to make it a point. So, like, not last night, but the night before, I sat down and I was like, I'm just going to read as much as I can before I start to feel tired. And I picked up the one book that I've really been sucked into.
Okay.
It's the Hunt Parent Gather, because
Okay.
it's just so intriguing to me. The last week, just being honest, I had a little bit of a minor surgery, so I had to sit and I wasn't able to lift things and go
Sorry.
about it. Really makes you sit down. And so when I was sitting, instead of being on my phone, I would just pick up my book and I would
Yeah.
read. And so I tried to make that a habit, going into like this week, is really just when I have those moments that I can sit down, is just picking up the book instead of picking up my phone. Because unless it's
Yeah.
urgent or, I have to be on for some reason, for me, honestly, there's no reason to have my phone right next to me.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the biggest thing, is just in the moment, like when my kids take quiet time, is maybe just telling myself, you don't need to necessarily go do the laundry right this moment. Why don't you take 15 minutes and sit down and read? And then it's more of a habit building right now that I said I was going to do in the new
Yeah.
year. And so following through with that, but
And I
that's
think,
kind of a time for it.
yeah. And I think to our point of what we've been talking about, it is these simple things, right? Just making that conscious choice of, I'm going to pick up the book versus my
Yeah.
phone. I even did the same thing last night. Normally I know my husband's going to get home at like 5:30 or 6, so I'll try to have dinner almost ready just for the rhythm of the evening. And but it was 4:30 and I did have a bucket of laundry sitting there, but I'm like, you know what? My kids, they were like entertained outside playing, all of them. And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna maybe just take this 15 minutes because my house is quiet, and I'm gonna sit here in the kitchen chair. I can hear them outside and just read. And I'm gonna look at that bucket of laundry and think, whatever, I'll get to it.
Nice. Well, that's the weird thing right now, is that my kids are getting older. So they're 7, 5, and almost 3. And so I think it's adjusting for me too, that I don't always have to be with them. Like
Yeah.
they can be in another room and play, and I don't have to be in there watching them. They're able to do that. So it's almost, for me, it's now I'm coming into that new season. And so it's okay, let's develop new habits
Yeah.
instead of, because I have to switch my mind. Like, I don't have to go in and be with them and supervise them. They're playing fine, unless someone starts crying, they're
Yeah.
fine. And same thing, the laundry's there, the dishes are there. And I was like, I don't know what to do for a second. And I was like, I can read. I don't have to wait till 9 o'clock at night when I'm tired. I can
Yeah.
sit down right now and I can read it. So it's very much like it's a new season of life for me right now. I'm like, they're all independent, kind of. I
I'm
can
thinking of the Aladdin song, "A Whole New." I mean, I shouldn't even sing that because no one needs to hear me sing on air. But "A Whole New World" is what's playing in
like,
my head.
I don't know what to do now. I'm like, they're all fine. They don't need me.
Yeah.
So I can start to get back to reading like I used to, or just, taking that moment to reset. But it's a very odd feeling now that I'm
Yeah.
like, hey, I can pick up my book and I don't have to go in and check on them all the time. So we're
Which is another one of those weird like parenting moments of like, wow, that's so strange that I could do something for
yeah.
myself.
It's been 7 years. It's been 7 whole years.
Yeah. So, well, you have been so gracious to prepare a book flight for us as well today. Can you tell us a little bit about how you chose these books?
So Joanna Gaines, the stories that we tell, I love her. Oddly enough, I have not really watched their show, but
Okay.
I just know her as a person. I've seen a couple of episodes and they're hilarious, her and her husband. But I have listened to her talk on some interviews, and just how she breaks down things is just, I can relate to it so much because she's a mom. She has quite a bit of an age difference between her last and her, I think it's her middle and her oldest.
Okay.
So when I picked up the book, I read her and her husband wrote a book, and I read how their whole story came about. And then she had her book come out, and I was like, I just relate to her so much because as a mom, she's saying, we just get so busy and we're just in the season of go, 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 go. And sometimes we fight the season that we're in. And she was talking about how they flip houses. And
Yeah.
she's like, I literally would go and try to make it as homey as I could the minute we got there, because I knew I was going to have to leave and I didn't want to. And she goes, one example was like, they had to leave and she absolutely refused to pack the house until like the night before. And she's like, because I didn't want to leave that house, I didn't want to leave that season. And I was like, I can kind of relate. She's talking about learning to be in the moment in those
Yeah.
seasons, even when you don't like the season. Instead of fighting it, just be in that season. And just, I'm in the middle of it right now. And so she's just really getting into how, it helps us to grow as people. We always think of, I guess she was saying, like, your roots are really rooted deeply in something. And she goes, but if you look at roots, they all spread out, and it's because they're growing, and it's in your life, you're growing as a person. So
Yeah.
sometimes change is what brings about that growth, and you can't fight it. And so I was like, oh my gosh. She's
Yes. Oh,
talking
I need
about,
to pick this up. I didn't realize it was so much on this like motherhood and parenting journey, but it makes sense because she's in it too.
yeah, and she talks about how it's very weird because it was one of her sons, I think, had a driver's license, got his driver's license, and she went outside to say goodbye to him. And then she walks inside, and her 5-year-old is like, Mommy, can you help me tie my shoe? And she's like, that's the different, moments that we're in with each kid. Is she was talking about how she just really wants to be present in each of those moments because
Yeah.
it's so busy with just life and you just miss that. And so I'm like, oh my, I was like highlighting stuff that she had, like, as a mom. And so it's been an amazing read. She's such a talented writer, just sharing her
Okay.
story, who she is. And then the other one is Max Lucado. I love his books. I
Yeah.
love how he reads. It's Be Anxious for Nothing. And so as a mom, I feel like I have become way more anxious
Mm-hmm.
just having kids, and even just in daily life. I'm like, I could check my heart rate. We can feel
Yeah.
the up. But he just writes so beautifully about just having faith and just not letting those worries, take over and steal it. And he goes into the difference between anxious and worry. And it was blowing my mind. Like the first 2 pages, I'm like, okay, I never really thought of anxiety like this, or how it represents what I'm thinking about. And they always say, like, worry is like a rocking chair. You move, but it never gets you anywhere. And it's
Yes.
picked up the space in your mind. And I was
Yeah.
like, okay, and you can't change it.
Yeah.
So I'm right in probably the second or third chapter, and it's just really starting to, as a mom, my faith has been a huge part of just my journey as a mom and going through the miscarriages. And it's really helping me to think of just, why am I so worried and anxious about these things? Because I'm not in control of them,
Yeah.
and I can't do anything about it. So, and I had the surgery last week. And so I had to sit, and I was very anxious, never been through surgery before. That was my
Sure.
first time.
Okay.
So it was like, after reading that, I was like, wow, I got myself all worked up. Like, I was so worried,
Yeah.
and just
And then you
think,
wonder why you spent so much time on the worry, right? I do that to myself. Like, well, why did I waste so much time worrying about that?
my blood pressure, like your whole body reacts to
Yeah.
it. So this was just something I saw the title of the book and I was like, I feel like I need to read that right now and just really work on, because with kids too, I don't want to pass on that worrying. You know,
Yeah.
you don't want them to be like that. You want them to be able to work through things. And so that kind of played into that with Joanna Gaines talking about motherhood and then the be anxious for nothing. And
Yeah.
then the
The quote at the end of the show I actually use is that books come into our life when we most need them. And I have always found that to be so true. I read this book a few years ago, and it, at that moment of my life, it really spoke to my life as well. Right. And just, it was so good that then after that, I went and recommended it to multiple other people. I was like, you should read this. It was really good and life changing to think about it.
it's very much, it just takes the spin, especially with anxiety. I think a lot of people struggle with that, and there's not a lot of speaking about it because you feel almost shame or you shouldn't. You know, I know a lot of people that do have anxiety and
Mhm.
panic attacks, and it's almost like a taboo. Like you don't want to talk about it. And it's like, well, we need to talk about it and we need to have ways to cope with it. And so just reading this book, I was like, wow, this just opened up my eyes to how he's explaining, you know, what it is and just ways of just thinking about it differently and just how you can change your mindset. And then it kind of plays into the other one. It's the
Okay.
hunt gather parent, which is the parenting. And it just, that one was recommended by a friend because she goes, it will blow your mind. She's like, my kids actually pick up and I don't ask them to. And I was like, what?
Hmm.
I need to read this book. Okay. Not saying that they will, but it's by, we were trying to figure out how to say her name, McLean Duclef.
Okay.
She had, so she was like a journalist, I guess. And so she went to all these medical, like she did the Ebola, she covered that outbreak and she did all these things. And what she noticed was that in different cultures, they treat their children differently. Like their kids will get up, and she was talking about was it the Mayan culture? The daughter just got up and started doing the dishes. She was like 12 and she just came out and she noticed like her mom was doing breakfast. And so the daughter just went over and started doing the dishes. And this woman was like, why is she just doing the dishes? You didn't even
Yeah.
ask her to. And the girl was like, I like to help my mom. I want to help her. And this woman had a 2-year-old at that time. And she's like, I remember laying in my bed just thinking, I don't want to do this today, because her daughter was having tantrums and she was, sounds like a very strong-willed child. And so she basically went on a mission to find in different cultures why their kids are so, like, they raise them so they will just initiate, you know,
Yeah.
helping responsibility. And in my kids, that's what I'm trying to do. And she has a PhD, so she has like research behind what she's doing. And then she just went and she actually lived with these people for a certain amount of
So
time to see
cool.
how they did it with her daughter. And I was like, and she goes, it just blew my mind. Just all these different cultures. It was very much she noticed the Western culture and how we treat our kids and how it's so confusing with just all the parenting advice, like praise your kids, don't praise them too much, put them on a routine, but don't put them on too tight of a routine. And she's
Yeah.
like, I was going crazy. And she goes, there's none of that. If you go to these, you know, other countries that are not Western culture, they're not influenced by it, the kids are all given responsibilities. They're not, the parents aren't having to go behind them and say, did you make your bed? Did you do your dishes? And
Yeah.
now, so I'm right in the beginning of it, and I'm
Okay.
very interested how she is going to, she's like, you know, chore charts can be something that doesn't help them to initiate what they need to do. And I'm like, well, we have chore charts. We can still do
What are you going
it.
to tell me about them?
So I was like, I just was really intrigued because they always say, like, in different countries, you should go traveling because the kids are just incorporated into the culture. And
Yeah.
so I'm like, right now, it's her, what she's talking about, and like some of the research and how, like, it's like a lot of the parenting advice was made from like the 1900s male viewpoint because there was a lot of babies in the hospitals and orphanages. So their guidelines were based on that. And so now it's flipping because
Wow.
obviously, yeah, it's like mind blowing how some
Yeah.
of this stuff came about. And I was like, well, that explains, why your doctor tells you this, but it doesn't really make sense because like I remember bringing my daughter home and they would say you have to feed her every 2 hours. And I'm like, but if she's not waking up, I'm not waking her up.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Nope.
and they're like, you need to feed her every 2 hours. She didn't sleep anyway, so it didn't matter. But it was
Yeah.
like, why would you do that? And she's talking about that came about because again, there was so many babies in the
Yeah.
orphanages or hospitals, they had to put them on feeding
Yeah.
schedules because they
To get to
couldn't.
them all.
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Wow.
So I'm very interested where this is going to go and like how, and my friend was like, it just blows your mind and it changes kind of your perspective on how you just give your kids responsibilities and how you incorporate them into your family. And that way they're doing it, initiating it. It's not you telling them. So I was like, I am going to read this book.
Yes. Oh, adding to my list as we get off the phone here for sure.
Okay. I'm like, my kids will pick up and I don't have to tell them. All right, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, and that saves so much like strife of, I've told you 3 times now and now I'm getting frustrated. Like, I'm gonna ask you again. Like, but
And you get a reward for it. And that I think that was in like the very first chapter. She was writing about her daughter and how she was trying to get her to just, I think it was like put on her shoes and her daughter was refusing. And she's like, I had to bribe her. I had to threaten her. And
yeah,
she's like, nothing was working. And she was getting more upset and I was getting more upset. And she's like, and I asked my doctors and they say, just make a schedule and be consistent. And she's like, she doesn't care.
she's two.
And it was just like how her mind was blown when she went to all these places. So I said, I am very excited to dig into it.
Okay. All right. So it's Hunt, Gather, Parent by McLean Duclet.
Like Duclef. She has
Duclef. Okay.
PhD. It's what ancient cultures can teach us about the lost art of raising happy, helpful little humans. It's a
Okay.
New York Times bestseller, so I would think it would pop up if you like Google it, but
Yeah. And I'll have all the links in the show notes, listeners, as well for the books. Um, as a quick little side note, I will say when we lived in Sicily, kids were a part of the culture. Totally
yeah,
different than America. Like they would be out till 10 p.m. with the family eating dinner at the restaurants. And in my mind, I'm thinking like my kid is a terror by 7:30. Like I would never even consider bringing him to a restaurant at this time. But yeah, they are a way of life and they are welcome everywhere. And it was such a beautiful place to have little children because it was so nice to feel like you're not getting a sneer because you're walking in
yeah,
with little kids.
it's very much. I said I would love to travel with my kids, but that was always a fear is that, your kids act up and everyone's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that, I said kids are kids, but my sister-in-law, her husband is from England and they traveled, they've gone, into Europe and that's what they said as well. Kids are welcome and it's
Yeah.
just a different culture. And I said, why in America are we not like that? Not that, I love America, but it
Yeah.
just was some
I think
things.
there's a lot more dignity to the kids, right? Of just recognizing like who they are and what the age they're at and just recognizing that they're children and like that is okay. And that's what children do.
Yes. And there's grace with that. You give
Yeah,
them grace.
absolutely. Well, how I love to end our show here is with our bonus pairing. So these are just a speed round of questions.
All
Are
right.
you a rereader?
I am. Yes.
Okay. All right. What is one book you've read that has changed your life?
Oh, goodness. One book that I have read that has changed my life. I honestly don't know. I feel like the one that has made the most influence right now is definitely just the Max Lucado book that is
Okay.
starting to really change how I think about just anxiety and mindset and just obviously not letting that fear and trusting in God to just take care of things and knowing that,
Yeah.
he's bigger. So
We need constant reminders of that.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. And then where is your favorite place to read?
I like to read on my couch, curled up under my blanket, or we go camping and I will sit. If it's raining or anything, I love to just sit in like the chair and just snuggle up and have my blanket and have my pillow. Um, those are probably my favorite places just to get cozy. And
Okay.
then if we're, but I like to read on the beach too, but we don't get there a lot as far
Yeah.
as the ocean.
Yeah.
I'm in a landlocked state.
Yeah. The other ones sound very, like reading mode activated. Like you get your blanket, you curl up, and reading
Yeah.
can begin.
Calm down.
Yeah. And then lastly, what are you reading next?
If I get through all three of these books, my goal is to get through them. It's probably to get through those in the next month. I would definitely like to, but I honestly think I'm gonna look more at Max Lucado books
Okay.
because he has so many that I have not really checked out yet. And I would love to see. I think Joanna Gaines has one more book that she wrote, so I would love to read another one of hers. I can't remember the name of it, but she just writes so beautifully. I'm like, and I can just relate so much to her as a mom. So
Yeah. And it's nice to have in mind, right? Of like you like this author, and so you can go and think, okay, yeah, I'll just get the next one by her. I feel like it takes out that indecision a little bit of like, where do I go next? Because you're like, no, I really like this author and their writing. I'm gonna go with that one.
you're probably going to really enjoy the book. You don't have to worry
Yes.
about get into it. That's the hardest part is when you get into a book and you're like, it's not really what I thought it was going to be. And so I still want to finish it, but it's kind of a struggle sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I've actually had to teach myself to be able to let a book go. Like, I just don't think this book is for
Right.
me. Because again, back to like having so little time. I'm like, I don't know that I want to spend a ton of time in this book. It's just not for me. And maybe it's just not for me right now in this season of life. Like I won't write it off. I'll maybe pick it up later.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna have to remember that. I always feel so guilty if I
I did
start
for
one.
so long. I had to finish.
I have to finish it. I have to finish it.
Yeah, no, same, 100%. So, but it's now, again, having less time in my life. It's just, okay, yeah, you don't have a lot of time. So just go with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Have to be okay.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know your time is precious and I appreciate all you've given me.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I had so much fun.
Yay, I'm glad. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Erin Roese and I, and books that find you when you need them. We'd love to hear what books have done this for you at www.bookishflights.com. Now on to the book flight from our sponsors, Bethany House. The first book is For a Lifetime by Gabrielle Meyer. Identical twin sisters, Grace and Hope, are time crossers who simultaneously live in 1692 as daughters of a tavern owner during the Salem witch trials, and in 1912 as an aviatrix and a journalist. As their 25th birthday approaches, they will each have to choose one life to keep and one to leave behind forever, no matter the cost. The second book of the book flight is Sisters of Corinth by Angela Hunt. In this book, the chief magistrate, Narcissus Ligus, sees a golden opportunity to rise in power and fortune by marrying his stepdaughter to the new governor's son. Yet Mariana's faith in Yeshua makes her as reluctant to wed a man who worships Roman gods as her jealous and status-obsessed stepsister, Prima, is determined to wed him. The last book of the book flight is An Rocky Mountain Journey by Misty M. Beller. Faith Collins masquerades as a man to find the woman who once saved her father's life to fulfill his dying wish. On her journey with her sisters through the Rockies, she teams up with a man in search of his brother, and together they must navigate the treacherous terrain while keeping Faith's identity a secret and their growing affection at bay. Thank you so much, Bethany House, for being a sponsor of this episode. To find links to these books, plus the 30% off discount on their website, head to the show notes where you can find direct links for each of these 3 books. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.